Welcome to the New Books Network.
This is Verdun and Pierre Delancey. NFT, DAO, ETH, WAGMI, HODL. It would have been hard to avoid these acronyms only a year ago. The hype around cryptocurrencies and blockchain art was almost as annoying as the glee with which crypto skeptics welcomed the sudden onset of the crypto winter. But for all the popularity of Bored Apes and Ponzi scheme stories, there seems to have been little serious engagement with the philosophical, political, and aesthetic implications of the blockchain. The Academy appears to have dismissed the crypto world out of hand, citing its financial unviability and the deeply problematic philosophical foundations of its technology. That's a research gap, if there ever was one, and one which the new book, Proof of Work, Blockchain Provocations by Rhea Myers addresses. Myers is a crypto artist, writer, and hacker who searches for faces in cryptographic hashes, follows a day in the life of a young shibe in the year 2032, and patiently explains why all art should be destructively uploaded to the blockchain. Myers focused on the blockchain technology in 2011, becoming one of the first artists to enter into creative, speculative, and conceptual engagement with the new internet. As ever, you'll find links to the works we discussed in the show notes. Welcome to the show, Rhea.
Thank you. It's good to be here.
There's a lot going on in the book, Rhea. It has artworks, it has art criticism, a bit of art history, some reflections on technical aspects of the blockchain, some proposals for what art could do in the space, a fair bit of Marxist critique, a bit of fiction in the form of a short story, a bit of Python code examples, and it also has the line avocado bread park trend replace position. So that's a triumph. Another triumph, I think, is that the book doesn't go on about NFTs all that much.
It doesn't, no.
Well, because we have so much to choose from, I actually want us to start with something that's formally outside of the purview of the volume, which is one of your earliest works. This is a piece called Postscript Virus from, I believe, 1993, which on the page appeared a bit like a fractal drawing. And I think this is interesting because it seems to already bring quite a lot of the ideas that I think permeate throughout your book. That is the idea of a language, that is the idea of a virus, manipulation, and reproduction.
Yes, I mean, Postscript at the time was the way that print media was prepared. You would create everything on your little Macintosh, print it out, well, not print it out, save it as Postscript, and then send it off to an enormous printing press, which would render the Postscript programming code as actual areas of colour or substance, and you would then squeeze the results out between enormous spinning metal plates covered in coloured goo. And I was interested at that time in choke points for intervention and finding a place to effectively intervene in the circulation of aesthetics and the way that that impacted how people see the world and sort of what I would now say reflects their ideology. So finding this programming language that was used to make all the magazines and all the books and all the posters that anyone saw, and finding that it was a programming language, which of course is a medium that you can manipulate, absolutely blew my brain. So I sort of, from my childhood knowledge of BASIC, the programming language that kids used to learn to program in the 1980s, I sort of had to quickly learn how Postscript worked because it was a strange language even for the time. And the point of the work isn't the little fractal tree, which I think as an example I got from somewhere or converted from somewhere. It's the fact that there's this body of code that can be sent to the printer or the printing press, and it will lurk there and it will randomize to a degree anything you send to it to have it print out a bit wibbly wobbly, a bit more chaotic, a bit more rave. Yeah, it's the actual work, as it were, is the code that randomizes the code that follows. And that, in virus terms, is the payload. It's the head of the virus. The replicator part, the part of the virus that would propagate it and copy it to other machines. I did write that as a proof of concept, but I decided I didn't want to go to prison if it worked. So I didn't actually try putting them together, and it didn't get any further than the PostScript printer in the architectural department at Canterbury College of Art.
And no one has tried it since. I'm slightly surprised by that, since PostScript still seems to run half of the world's printers.
Yes, yeah.
Looking at your practice, I think this is a very important and formative example of what you've been doing, because it brings together a whole bunch of elements that I think are very usefully explored through the prism of computational art, which is also a term and a typology that I would like you to explain in a moment. So you have language, you have reprogramming of language, and if I'm not wrong, PostScript is actually a language that is kind of human readable.
Yes.
You've got language, you've got repurposing of language, you have the relationship between language and some kind of visual output, which is where the loaded term aesthetics comes in. Why do we need a computer for all of this? So I'm interested in your perspective on how these things come together, and your perspective in particular as someone who has come to the art world or come to the practice of art through the trajectory of computational arts.
I can't claim any great historical insights in choosing to use computers. It's not like I was Harold Cohen, who was an internationally renowned colorist painter who went to the US, saw a computer and said, right, I'm changing what I'm doing. I grew up when information technology was a hot topic. And as a child, I was using various different little 8-bit British home computers to draw coloured squares on the screen and not realise what I was missing out on in the much wider world of computer art. So, it wasn't like I sat down, mastered the arts, looked around for relevant technology and said, goodness, this new computing machinery seems like it might be a way of upsetting people's assumptions. I must learn about this. It was basically a given, and the thing that really made it a given was the prevalence of vector graphic art. So the kind of art that you draw by stretching a line across the page and turning it to a curve, rather than the kind of mark that you make pixel by pixel, setting it blue or green or using a simulated airbrush. The prevalence of that kind of graphics in record covers and posters and popular cultural imagery around the start of the 90s. So there was that. There was the emergence of computer graphics. I'd seen Luxo Junior. And again, coming back to the fact that this was around when I was a kid, there's a children's publisher called Usborne, who I used to get books through the local school book club in England, and one of their computer books had Explore, Ken Knowlton and others, graphics programming language as an example of things that computers can do, and had a very fanciful full-page illustration of Harold Cohen and Aaron drawing away in the Tate and saying, hey, look, you can make art with computers. So I, from that point of view, I didn't have to think, hey, you could use these things to make art. It's like I knew that it was possible, but I also knew that if you said this to people in the proper, serious, respectable art world, they'd look at you either like you had lost your mind or like you were some sort of evil entryist from the land of accounting or something. And that made it interesting, that ability to take something that was there both in popular culture and in an ongoing alternative world of art and start applying it to the questions and problems that I was exposed to at art school. Just that really added up. And I mean, I started making art with screen prints and dye photo transfers and paint and all sorts of things. I had a brief flirtation with physical media before going all in on digital. I grew up with it. It was a continuation of it into the life world that I found myself in.
That's interesting. So you've either provided us with an argument for closing libraries or keeping them open, depending on how this story ends by the end of a conversation.
For libraries, I had a wonderful experience when I was at Kingston Polytechnic, now Kingston University, on my art
Mm.
foundation course, and we were given the task to interpret one painting in another artist's style. And I was given a futurist cyclist and a Jackson Pollock spatter painting. And I just
Mm.
couldn't, from the tiny reproduction of the futurist cyclist I'd been given, work out pretty much where the cyclist was. But fortunately, the library had a book which was a collection of sketches by Boccioni or Marinetti or whoever, and it had the precise sketches for this painting where it starts out with a very naturalistic charcoal or pencil sketch of a cyclist circa 1900 whatever, adds some force lines to it, breaks it down into triangles, and then goes to town.
Mhm.
And that early experience of access to knowledge and openness of knowledge as an enabling condition for the practice of art really left an impression on me. And the other thing that came from that was when I encountered the art and language group's work when I went to do my degree and saw that they'd done a portrait of Lenin in the style of Jackson Pollock. I very quickly recognised something there that I had engaged with in a sort of foundation student way previously, and that was my other obsession other than
Mm.
technology going forward.
Well, I'll certainly try to find a link for listeners to the image of Uncle Lenin. It's interesting, you've already driven us into the arena of art history. Now, let's dwell a little bit on art and language, because as I already highlighted, language seems to seep through everything that you've done in your practice, in writing and in its visual aspects. The relationship to the conditions of conceptual art that the group Art and Language, who were active mostly in the 70s in London and in New York, and have made a whole range of really seminal work that ended up defining in a trajectory very different to the kind of usually known, that of Daniel Buren and Hans Hackett. They created a very different reading of conceptual art.
Yes, it provided a way of taking a theoretical and technical practice into the materials of art in a way that didn't make either of them secondary. So, to take the example of a painting of Lenin in the style of Jackson Pollock, that was originally proposed conversationally or in an article as an impossible picture. How could you reconcile the then current post-war history of abstract expressionism and socialist realism? They came from incompatible universes. And then, so the technical challenge that came from that, of actually making that, and the results of making it and learning from it, this sort of feedback loop of the theoretical and the practical that doesn't reduce to an ideologically directed praxis. There's still some uncertainty and risk to the doing of the thinking and the thinking of the doing, and then the doing of the making and the making of the doing. So from Charles Harrison, who was associated with the group, I got a very strong understanding and desire for a historical materialist art history.
Mhm.
The idea that the art doesn't stop at the edge of the frame, that there are social and historical effects on and in art, and that technique, that the making of the art, the materials used in the art, is a wider question than was being recognised, I feel, at the time. This may simply have been me looking for an excuse to play around with computers, but I did a lot of reading, which for someone who did not have a background in philosophy or politics was fairly eyeball melting at the time.
Okay, we can go into directions. I think we could splinter into politics straight away, but I have a feeling we maybe haven't done enough justice to your actual current practice. And let's talk about how you entered the blockchain space. And maybe rather than try to
Yes.
figure out what the blockchain is too quickly, because I mean, your practice is an exploration of both the possibilities and the meanings, and quite often the very definitions of crypto art and its many associated arenas.
Yeah.
I think it would be a good idea just to show off your trophy cabinet to tell our listeners about all these things that you either invented or nearly invented or simply completely missed out on. I've heard you admit to this.
Yes.
Tell me how you nearly invented NFTs, how you nearly invented Bitcoin, and how it all went kind of right and wrong. And maybe some of your credits would be useful here so we
Yes.
can see from
Okay.
what
Certainly.
perspective, politically and practically, that conversation proceeds.
Yes, I very fortunately I am not Satoshi. I did not invent or almost invent Bitcoin. I think I first heard of it via the Peer-to-Peer Foundation,
Mhm.
and by 2011 I'd done a blog post saying I will be the world's first Bitcoin artist. Send me a Bitcoin, and I will draw you a Bitcoin and send it to you. And someone emailed me and said, "How do we do this?" And I didn't get back to them because I was worried that a Bitcoin wouldn't pay for the stamp to send the drawing to them by the time I'd finished. So
I mean, a valid concern, it
yes, but
seems.
over time, this is a nice example of,
Mm.
shall we say, my lack of visionary preparedness. But by 2014, I'd moved from the UK to Canada. I was waiting for my permanent residency and I was unable to work, so I was walking around Vancouver a lot and going to interesting events there. Some of the interesting events were cryptocurrency oriented events, and I just recognized the vibe of excited young people in very dingy basements with projectors talking about how they were going to change the world and or get rich and or change the world while getting rich. And it was the vibe I remembered from the 90s sort of internet scene, the not quite net art, but the sort of web design and social change scene in London, in England in the 90s. I recognise this vibe, I recognise this look.
Mm.
I understand some of the technology. What fascinates me here is the culture. And it was the culture around cryptocurrency that really drew me in, notably Dogecoin over time, because that really started out as a satirical currency to the extent that that's possible,
Mhm.
but that freed people up to play with it in a way that allowed them to come up with interesting cultural forms which fed back into the sort of success and the structure of Dogecoin as a currency rather than a joke. And the reason I really dug into cryptocurrency, into the blockchain and smart contracts as they came up, was that I recognized the potential there for genuine minor social reform
Mhm.
in all the claims of revolution and new worlds, but I also recognized how it was a wonderful index, a wonderful representation of post-financial crash social anxieties and ambitions. So it's like I was already dealing with a portrait in a way or a landscape painting by looking at crypto as a sort of embodied representation
Mhm.
of, both carried over and abandoned fixations from wider society. And the more I dug into that, the more it worked as a concept for me. And I needed resources to be able to communicate this because very early on I decided that I wanted to explain to the nice techno-libertarian cryptocurrency people that art was probably an interesting thing for them to get involved with because it was an interesting use case for their technology and a way of playing with it without being responsible for, I don't know, someone's food or housing or meds. And I was trying to explain to my nice Euro lefty art world friends, I'm a Euro lefty art world friend, that this technology and the ideological memeplex behind it was something interesting to dig into critically and art productively and possibly, who knows, even financially, because artists got to eat. And I realized that if I wanted to do a novel form of novel ideas about a novel technology, that was three strikes against the work to start with. So as with
Mm.
the PostScript viruses, I needed something for this to work on, and I very quickly went back to NetArt, which was another attempt to get there first artistically in a capitalist
Yeah.
network of value to sort of almost pre-spoil it critically, well, not to actually spoil it, but to sort of have a critical presence there and a creative presence there from day zero. And conceptual arts, which I'd actually steered clear of a lot previously, surprisingly, in a direct way, was irresistible because it was an attempt at an exit from the actually existing art world of the 1960s in terms of the valuation and circulation and display of art in response to a changing political and ideological and social climate. And it was very quickly recuperated by the mainstream art world, but not before it had, quotes, dematerialized art in interesting ways and hit on many of the problems that I quickly recognized any use of cryptocurrency or blockchain technology in art or art making would encounter. And so that led to making work that looks like very, 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 very late conceptualism. And it kind of is, but not visually. Visually, it's using the resources that it needs to communicate. And those resources do happen to look like conceptualism, but that's not the initial driver.
Okay, can I interrogate this? Because I think this is the point at which we have to start thinking about what aesthetic means. You described this
Yes.
really beautiful moment where before the crypto world and art came together, as that explosion came maybe around 2017, or frankly during lockdowns when everyone was suddenly bored, the art world finally noticed. But there was this period where you suggest that visualizing, aestheticizing some aspects of these technologies actually can be used to reveal properties of the technologies themselves. So there's a point at which it is the artistic use of the blockchain that reveals what the blockchain is.
Yes.
That was an incredibly interesting moment. And frankly, all of the universe would want to be given that opportunity. But then you've also just instantly went to the point where you separated the visualization of the conceptual. And then you've also said, oh, it also happens to look like historical conceptualism. So I think we've got to the point where there's the promise, and that promise already in your own description of your own work is almost complicated to the point of being not particularly trustworthy, not necessarily in your description, but maybe in the way that we derive truth from the blockchain. So I'm steering us towards another big keyword, but aesthetics and truth and the blockchain.
Yes.
Is
Yeah.
there enough time left in this interview to try to think about those things?
Is there enough time left in the universe? I mean, these are big ones, ignoring blockchain. So I use aesthetics as something of a boo word or a placeholder. It's kind of my Smurfy. If you remember the Smurfs, if you have something that you wish to say that you don't have a word for, but everyone else knows what you mean, you say Smurfy. I generally say aesthetics. I have a few different meanings of it, which I play very fast and loose with. A sort of advertising style meaning of these are the brand colors and shapes and font for something. Like you know what an Art Nouveau aesthetic is. You may have Art Nouveau work that does not fit that aesthetic, and you may have work in that aesthetic that is not Art Nouveau, but you can recognize the stylistic ticks and innovations and materials of a particular representational or consumption scheme for experience, for sense data, for the world that we would label as an aesthetic. There's the sort of art historical / philosophical game of aesthetics, which never really seems to get very far, and every few years someone goes, no, we've solved it. It's just neurons, or no, it's just the class struggle of base versus superstructure, or no, it's just whatever God wants us to, and none of these are convincing to anyone who hasn't written them. And then there's the sort of hardcore philosophical encounter of the subject with the phenomenon or whatever. And these are all aesthetics. But when I say aesthetics, like Humpty Dumpty, I mean precisely what I mean. And I generally mean either what something looks like in a historically passable way, or interesting arguments that we can have about that, given the knowledge that we have of how that might have come about. And why this is useful when dealing with something which is fantastically abstract and often phrased in very strange language, like Bitcoin originally and then cryptocurrency and the blockchain, is you can provide a map or a diagram. You can provide something that people can see, and if they see something, they can say something. So it's a useful function for art. And the reason I call it art rather than design is that immediate effectiveness of it isn't important. It's not designed, what I'm doing is not designed to help you spot a price change or a breakout in popularity of a piece of art or anything. It's trying to give people a way of having a feel for the whole technological system and what it is embedded in. And that is something that you can do in various different ways. People have sonified the blockchains. We have blockchain music. I've obviously written stories to try and get across what it would feel like in the unlikely world where we don't have Westphalian states, but we do have the internet and cryptocurrency, and everyone acts like a good, rational actor in a crypto-anarchist world. But for me, the thing that I had to practice with was image making or aesthetic deployment or intervening at interesting choke points in the public consumption of the visual as the sort of tip of the social ideological iceberg that produces it. So the idea of aestheticizing the blockchain was a useful way of providing people with a map of something I felt was technically and socially interesting, and blockchainizing aesthetics, which is a horrible phrase, but I'll find a better one next time, was a way of problematizing some very comfortable assumptions about the nature of the actually existing art world.
All right. I wonder if we could try to think about the relationship between the actual existing art world that you just referred to and the art world as it might have become engaged in various blockchain technologies over the past decade. And maybe this is a very quick summary in a way that they'd have nothing to do with each other, even though you are one of the artists who have crossed over from the basement full of exciting people and the projectors and also the auction house. But it strikes
Yes.
me like those two things are almost unlinked.
Yeah, it's a difficult one. In 2014, I was writing. Sort of, I sat down and I thought, how would you make a complete parallel art world but on the blockchain? I wrote lots of the stuff in the book comes from that period with me trying to write, a catalog raison system on the blockchain and little art markets on the blockchain and stuff like that. And it was sort of both to demonstrate that it was possible to try and steer it in particular ways. I'm not personally a fan of the artist resale right, but I knew that people would want it, so that was coded into my little art market contract, which went on the Ethereum pre-release testnet. And I was imagining a very different blockchain art world from the one that came to pass by the Beeple sale in 2021, which does mark the explosion of interest, which we can almost shorthand as negative interest in the blockchain. But I was sort of trying to work out how to make smart contract net art that would get itself exhibited. Primavera de Filippi was working on Plantoid, which was again a self-exhibiting, self-commissioning artwork on the blockchain. Lily Lara was working on Nillacoin, which was a very culture jamming style approach to brands via the blockchain. And of course, Kevin McCoy had made quantum, which, for all the arguments that have just been resolved in court, is both a reasonable example of what you could reasonably call the first NFT, and also very different from the actual NFT market that we ended up with a few years later in interesting ways. So going from like this prefigurative mode to the, oh wow, there's there is this thing called the rare art space, which was the early NFT space, and then Sotheby's and Christie's and various name brand art institutions getting interested, rather than nice places like Furtherfield, who I've worked with for years, who did some very early shows of blockchain work in an art context. Seeing that change, it was very different from anything I hoped for. But the strange thing is the early projects were made by artists. I was doing my usual, we should replace the fiat art world with the blockchain, sort of, turn aside the canals, flood the museums act on a panel, and Kevin McCoy pointed out that I'm from the legacy art world and he's from the legacy art world, and not his words. And we had done early work on what became NFTs, and even earlier projects like Ascribe had an art historian involved. So bizarrely, this technology that's positioned as coming from outside the art world pretty much came from inside it. And that is interesting when looking at auction houses and mainstream art critics encountering this technology and taking that narrative at face value, because it means that they are sort of both promoting and critiquing not quite a simulation, but certainly one story, rather than taking the kind of fuller critical view that we're meant to be paying art historians, art critics for.
This is, I think, a good way to start really examining the brief history of the blockchain and its political potential, including some of its disappointments. So, I mean, you haven't really been using too many political buzzwords yet, but it's hard to think about crypto without someone screaming, anarcho-capitalism or dirty libertarianism or occasionally fascism, which
Yes.
I was quite relieved to see you in the book also laugh at this kind of ease within which the critical world characterizes anything it doesn't understand as fascism.
In an era of actually rising fascism, the kind of academic career that you could replace with a function that returns fascism, whatever value you feed it, it's not adding value, not to name names.
We are recording this for mostly career academics, so
yes.
Good luck.
I envy you all. Please give me tenure. Anyway, so with Bitcoin, Bitcoin is, well, it's an economic solution to a technical problem in an ideological program. The ideological program is the cypherpunk anarcho-capitalist techno-libertarian program, and we are now drowning in buzzwords. So in the 90s, there was a group of activist technologists called the cypherpunks. We owe them a lot. They are the reason that, broadly speaking, they are the reason that we can securely talk to each other using strong encryption that the government doesn't have a backdoor into, just to use against the bad guys and absolutely not to spy on their ex. So the cypherpunks believed strongly in private property, which obviously puts them immediately off to the side from communist socialists and anarcho-socialists, who very, very much less down with the commodity form as any kind of thing. And so the privacy part of their program sort of led to, encrypted communication, which is great. The privacy of your transactions, money being speech, remained an open problem, because whilst I can send you a secret message that you can decode, if that secret message is, I'm sending you £10 or I'm sending you $100. I can send the same message to anyone else and nobody will be one the wiser. And whilst that's great for it's not great for a sort of scarcity-based currency of the kind that we use in day-to-day life. And so you can solve this by having an institution. You can have the state or a bank or just this one guy at your local hacker space you really trust who approves and keeps track of all of the money, all of the economic exchanges in your economy or your society. And this is fine until they don't like you. And my friends with me on the left tend to have trouble understanding at this point because it's like, well, don't you want the government to stop sending money to terrorists and drug dealers and horrible people? And it's like, well, if they would, that would be great. You know how you're concerned about people needing to save up money to flee states in the US where their existence will shortly be illegal. Do you want the state censoring your ability to send them money to escape or for them to pay for their rent or food or medication? And at that point, there is just a magical solution to be discovered, which absolutely does not include cryptocurrency, despite it being created to remove that kind of treacherous third-party intermediary who can commit acts of injustice at the moment of economic exchange. When I am saying, here you go, here is £100 to pay your rent, you do not want someone swooping in and saying, nope, I'm stopping that because we've just passed the Landlord Protection Act of 2024. So the thing that Bitcoin does is it makes it possible to remove, at the moment of transaction, that treacherous third party, the poorly named but in context understandable quotes trusted third parties of Bitcoin. And this is an anarchist move. This removes a higher authority. This is a critical philosophical move. It subtracts the state from moments of authentic social exchange. And it does that not with a particularly clever algorithm. I mean, the early code has bugs in it, and if you show Bitcoin 1 to a cryptographer, they'll go, why did they use that? But it replaced a technical problem with an economic incentive, which again is not sort of a popular move for non-market socialists or non-capitalist anarchists. So this area just opens up onto these fascinating issues within the political and social struggles that we currently face. But it comes from a place which many people who would greatly benefit from, at the very least, having a seriously informed critique of it, are just unwilling to look at. And I'm not trying to recuperate the sort of extremist right libertarianism of some of the people who use and or produce this technology any more than I'm trying to sort of rehabilitate Maoism or anything by pointing out that the left is a thing and it has good ideas and good intentions. Just, some of the people in it are a bit enthusiastic. But I spent the 2 years after the Beeple sale being yelled at on social media by people who knew that I was supporting fascism, that I was a scammer, that I was destroying the environment, that I was against social justice, anything that people had ready to go. NFTs, as they became this blank slate to project onto. They became this literal sociological scapegoat for people to place the tensions of the community onto and drive out into the wilderness. And that was both critically interesting to engage with and psychologically not some of my best days.
Can I suggest that maybe the insertion of art into the blockchain is actually a place in which there's a reason that became a conduit for that critique? Just very briefly, in the interest of network neutrality, which is a concept I've just invented for myself, I'm going to give a slightly different side of the culture war argument for not having the state involved in one's banking transactions, and I simply point to the Canadian tracker convoy. But I'm interested in the point at which the artist becomes somehow involved in mediating to a much broader audience than previously. This happens again 2021 with Beeple and thereabouts. Suddenly the artist is inserted with an aesthetic project into a conversation about trust. We have terms like a zero trust society, which is a deeply loaded idea. The fact that we should somehow all strive to live in a culture in which our social relationships, whether they involve the state or not, are based on hermeneutics of mistrust. I think one of the many reasons that not only the left is so suspicious of this is that the blockchain really goes a very long way away from its ability to accurately record time, which is about the only thing it really technically does. And that in itself, I think, is shown to be significant. This is almost a game changer for a lot of philosophical thought. But to go from that to let's reorganize society, somehow both the left and quite a lot of the right, bizarrely, even the right that would somehow be okay with libertarian ideas, that they have become so suspicious of it. So yeah, my knee-jerk reaction is to try to blame the artist for it somehow. So yes, I'm blaming you, the artist.
That's what I'm here for. So I mentioned trust as a concept earlier, and you mentioned time. And yes, in Satoshi Nakamoto's original Bitcoin white paper, which does get waved to like little red books if you talk to blockchain true believers, but despite that, it's a good and interesting read that helps deflate a lot of claims around cryptocurrency. He doesn't say the word blockchain, he talks about a timestamp server. And yeah, this is the problem that Bitcoin and the blockchain as we now understand it was created to solve. How do you establish the order of events? In this case, the exchange of money or value in the absence of a centralized authority figure, in the absence of a god, a state, some sort of Lacanian father figure, or the sort of toughest guy in your local group.
That's not going to work. You're never going to get rid of him. But never mind that.
It's like, yeah, how do you establish this in the absence of a transcendental authority? And that phrasing is, to be fair, due to Nick Land, but that it's still a very good phrasing of the problem and of what is so interesting about this particular solution. But the fact of what trust means in that paper, that we end up very quickly with a confusion of terms of art. You want socially to trust the people around you. You want to be able to walk down the street without someone stabbing you or mugging you. You don't want to be living with someone who is secretly an MI5 agent under an assumed identity. You want to be able to trust your bank not to close your account for no reason and give all your money to someone you don't like. These are examples of trustworthiness, of the ability to trust, of earned trust. The kind of trust that Satoshi Nakamoto, whoever they were, is talking about in the Bitcoin white paper is where you have no option but to trust someone who might betray you. In game theoretic terms, you've introduced another party into a two-player game who can simply declare the results null and void. In social trust terms, you want to ensure that no one is lurking in dark alleys about to run out to stab you or mug you. And it's like wanting to remove the need to assume that things will be okay, to sort of trust that things will be okay. It's the difference between having to trust and being able to trust. And so when people talk about a trustless society, they absolutely don't mean a society of the popular image of the East German state, where half of the state is spying on the other and when you pick up the phone to tell your friend a joke, you laugh, they laugh, and the Stasi officer listening to you laughs. It's not that kind of corrosive Mr. Robot style paranoia as first ontology world. It's a world where, in fact, you can trust people because no one else can betray you for them. So yeah, it's sort of people both promoting trustlessness and critiquing it do completely miss this. They do sort of have you should be this robust, rugged individual who doesn't trust anyone. And so that's fine, but if you try living like that, you will very, very quickly go a bit strange. It's more you should not have to trust someone who can flip the table when you're having lunch with a friend. It's that kind of trust, but we really need a better word for it. I would not want to live in the trustless society that those who define it as not being able to trust anyone imagine, because that'd be a very cold and lonely place. It's a dark forest in the Cixin-Liu sense of sort of, a Cold War mutually assured destruction universe where if you find anyone else, you have to destroy them before they destroy you.
Funny enough, it's about the only work of science fiction that I read in the last decade or so. So I get the sense of existential dread, which there is
Yes.
characterized as inevitable. So I completely also understand
Yes,
why the anxiety of the blockchain kind of induces this
yeah.
vision already. And I won't keep you exercising because it was very useful to hear the basic confusion. And I will stick by my charge that art is a very, very flawed way to try to dispel some of these misunderstandings. Like for art to induce trust involves both demagoguery and propaganda, and we've seen a lot of examples in art history of that happening. But to look for a positive, there is something that art, or at least the way that we understand the art market to do, it is able to illustrate trust. And I think, Phil, we've also not been talking about your own practice, your own works enough. So I want to look at some of your blockchain works that deal with transactions, that deal with contracts, that deal with exchanges of money, per se, or money, or ciphers for money, because that's kind of a proxy for this idea of trust and exchange. And again, it helps us to think about the relationship between the power of aesthetics, in whichever meaning we want to play with now, the power of aesthetics to illustrate, and then the power of a transaction to actually run the point home.
Yes, I mean, nobody should trust artists. We make poets look like paragons of honest society. Sort of, if an artist shows you something, it's not real because it's art. If it wasn't art, it would just be something in the real world. So artists are dealers in and of unreality. And that can, as you rightly point out, be propagandistic. A lot of the sort of folk art of the cryptocurrency space early on was, big paintings of project logos, or very, very iconic in the religious sense paintings of project founders and so on. And that's absolutely a thing. Where bringing an alternative system of value up against an existing system of value helps is it gets people to reveal themselves.
Mm-hmm.
So I love art. I love the history of art. I love people who work in the art world, in the non-profit art world, in art academia. Like this is my life, and it's what I do regardless of what I am doing. We all know where the money comes from. We all know where it goes. We all know the injustices endemic within this system, if nothing else, because it is part of a wider system of injustices. But we manage to be polite about that. And if someone pops up and says, hey, I'm selling this thing, a little electronic certificate of authenticity or whatever, for $5,000, $60,000, $72 million, that focuses the attention because it's a figure, it's a event against the ground of a not uncritiqued, but a despectacularized, if that's a word, art world where we're used to things selling for ridiculous prices. And the transparency of the blockchain as it currently exists serves two purposes. It allows people to see how much this stuff sells for and get very angry about it. If it doesn't then allow them to think about the wider art world that it is at this point trying to recreate, then that's a failure of critical reflexivity. I'm not saying that every new way of charging people for art that comes along can be defended on the basis that it reminds us that, hey, people pay for art in the petrodollar art world as well. Blockchain, for me, is just a uniquely transparent and plastic way of engaging with this. Transactions on the blockchain originally were just sending Bitcoin to each other, hence the name. They are financial transactions. You can send a lot more data with them now. They're basically messages which may or may not have value attached. And the semantic drift of terms like transaction and contract within the blockchain space is interesting in itself. There's sort of not even family resemblance remaining in some of these terms now. One of my favorite movies of all time is Tarkovsky's Stalker. And spoilers for a 40-year-old Soviet movie, the bit at the end where they arrive at the room that grants your wishes and they're trying to decide whether to go in or not, and the writer says that what happened to the guy that Stalker's talking about, who went in there to beg to have his brother back, was that all he got was a big pile of cash, because that's what his baser instincts wanted. And we see that in behavioral economics as revealed versus stated preference. Everyone says they want to save the environment. Everyone reveals their preference for going on a jet plane to an art fair or buying the toilet paper that doesn't dissolve in your hand. And that's very, very easy to critique. How much would you pay to have a lost childhood pet back or whatever? Well, you cannot pay enough for that to actually happen. There is a limit to money's ability to reveal preferences, but within the space where you are either paying for something or not paying for something, money does focus the mind in purportedly good but at least useful ways. So sort of saying, yes, someone is paying for this, it's a strong indicator that someone somewhere believes that there is some sort of value there. And absolutely none of the critiques of NFT art, of blockchain art that I've seen are unique to the medium compared to the contemporary art world. And sort of the way I have dug into this is precisely by being an untrustworthy artist. The artist as trickster figure. Something like is art very early on. It takes the old 1960s, hey, what's art? Art is whatever an artist says it is. Arthur Danto, the nominational theory, the institutional theory of art. Art is whatever the art world says, which artists misunderstood to mean art is whatever artists say. And with that, I'm sort of delegating this so that anyone can assert that this particular thing is art or not art with all of the power of the blockchain, which at the time was an appreciable fraction of the Earth's computing resources, proving this assertion, compared to which an artist going to a gallery and saying that box is art is, that's absolutely minor. This is an amazing way of proving that things are art. And sort of from the first word there, it's all lies. It's not anyone. I guess 2014, it's the few people who have the wealth, technological knowledge and privilege to access this system. With apologies to vulgar Marxism, money is not an ontology of reality. The fact that you've paid to make this assertion is certainly a social signal, but it doesn't actually prove that it is or it isn't. And it cascades from here. So rather than saying, yes, this technology is trustworthy, and yes, I'm a trustworthy artist, trust me and click this button. There's a moment of bathos to it where you're looking at it and it's like, great, I can click the button and toggle it, and is that it? And the answer is no, that's not it. It opens out onto to more, and I would like you to think about this, please, whichever direction you're coming from. And like something later on in the same series, there's a work called Art Is, which allows you to define what art is, which is obviously an open historical problem, and everyone has their own perfect definition that nobody else really tends to agree with by the time you get to the fine print. And it's a list of, I think, 10 definitions of art using a little controlled vocabulary stored on the Ethereum blockchain that anyone can change if they pay an amount of cryptocurrency to do so. So the first one, you pay a fraction of a penny. The last one, you'd have to pay billions of dollars to change. And this is the revealed preferences part of behavioral economics again. And it's sort of, I enjoy making models that are almost precisely wrong. As Douglas Adams described it in The Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy, something that is almost but not entirely unlike tea. If you're trying to make a cup of tea, as Art and Language described it, disobedience in obedience. It's the no, not like that of the interview where someone says, here's my definition of art, and you make a model of it that is perfect for the description. It obeys the letter, but absolutely fails to obey the spirit of what they meant. And it's a useful critical move in terms of it's actually harder to do than just saying, no, that's wrong. It's also more fun to do and more fun to look at than just saying, no, that's wrong. And it gives you something to then engage with and react to in time. So these very, very simple now, but at the time they were more complex than anything else on the pre-launch Ethereum blockchain. So it contain not monetary value, but sort of aesthetic properties or ontological claims. This was a way of trying not to let this technology just slide comfortably and untroubledly and uncritically into its use by e-commerce solutions providers or whatever. Yeah, I mean, for me, that would be my response to artists either as stalking horses for a trust that the technology hasn't earned, or art as any kind of Potemkin village for the promise of the blockchain. It's more, can it do this? Well, no, but the way it fails to is interesting. Because if you're not interested in the history of failures in your field, then you're not really learning your field. You're just learning, the propaganda, the history that's been written by the winners.
Yeah, this is interesting. I came kind of in my journey as a critic of the NFT in its very straightforward sense to recently to understand that the temporary success of the whole movement was illustrative of an otherwise significant speculative deficit in practice and in critique. So you described with this Douglas Adams analogy this idea that we would be able to create things that are not like what we already know, but don't necessarily adhere to particularly predefined or easily understandable categories. And I think that's an aspect of critique that is both elusive and it's really troubling. It's like in my thinking, for instance, there was a moment of this speculative realism, which later merged into object-oriented ontology, which is something that I think you've tried to deal with in your work and also in your writing. I wonder if you could speculate a little bit about places where these kind of critiques can take space, if not on the blockchain, if that avenue has become foreclosed?
So if the avenue has become foreclosed, and sort of I only ever regarded this space as a temporary autonomous zone. It's like sort of, if you are going to take on capital wins, that's how it extends itself. And if you can create genuine value, then capital doesn't even say thank you very much as it slurps it up. But I was amazed by how long the space of alterity that cryptocurrency and the blockchain opened up remained open for, and it is still just possible to perform sort of minor acts of economic justice or of speculative economics using this technology without it going back to A16Z as soon as you say it.
Mm.
But we are absolutely not in the anarcho-capitalist post-revolutionary paradise that I describe in Bad Shibe. We are in what's looking like another financial crisis, and the state is blaming crypto for this, whilst pushing regulations which would bake in the few really big non-crypto institutions as the winners of the entire game, which is a bizarre time to be in. But anyway, coming back to where else this could take place, the sort of the gaps in surveillance capitalism, in techno capital, are always cultural spaces. They are always spaces of production. If you're on a Discord, yes, this is it's a commercial operation that you are in some way supporting, but the culture that is generated in these sort of concealed spaces that are part of someone's unicorn business plan continue to both trivially and profoundly redistribute wealth. Trivially in terms of, it would cost some tens of dollars a month to set up your own server to have conversations on. Profoundly in the sense that these conversations people are having, these are plans that people are making that are out of the public eye in a meaningful way, and the organisation, as it were, and the avoiding cultural closure is taking place in very, very cypherpunk recognizable contexts of encrypted messaging between, at least initially, pseudonymous participants. And the joke that a DAO, a decentralized autonomous organization, which is a blockchain program that has some model of rules that you can use to vote and manage its treasury with. The joke that a DAO is a Discord group with a cryptocurrency wallet attached starts to show that much as we're not all running Richard Stallman's GNU system, we're all running Linux. The tools that the Free Software Foundation created in the 80s and early 90s could be used to make something that has much of the effect, if not the spirit, that they wished to achieve, just in a way that does horrify the people who made it. So, I can easily see groups using encrypted messaging technology, these kinds of, the ability to prove that something has happened economically, cryptographically, and sort of various other affordances, which, for all the complaints from cryptographers that cryptocurrency isn't crypto, please give us back the word crypto. The work that blockchain researchers have done has pushed entire areas of cryptography very far ahead. And this sort of combination of more advanced cryptography, ongoing temporary autonomous zones of social flourishing and organisation and production, and the ability to somehow not have that immediately siphoned off by capital, even if it's only getting paid rather than not getting paid for what you do, which is a problem under capitalism that we cannot wish away, whatever our preferred economic system would be. I think that even if cryptocurrency and or smart contracts and or blockchains have nothing to offer to the future of any kind of social alterity or economic organizing, the technology, the knowledge, and the problematics that it has produced are there ready to be seized on by whatever the next generation of people who go, hang on, I don't like the way things are. I would like things to be different, please. And as the state gets more and more intrusive, and as actually existent fascism becomes more and more of a problem, people are going to have more of these actual material tasks that not being wiped out will require them to perform, and there may yet be something here.
May I ask you a deeply personal question?
You may, yes.
So I definitely am of the opinion that the actually existing fascism is a bogeyman. I think I might have an inkling to what you're referring to.
Yes.
And I'm trying to figure out whether in the both ideological and technological space there isn't, that you've just described so eloquently and you practiced for decades, whether there isn't a correspondence to your individual experience. So the personal bit is that you came out as trans not long ago, as far as I understand.
Outed.
Sorry. I mean, that in and of itself isn't that exciting to really comment. But as a technological and political, it's not a move. I'm not going to try to suggest that you've done anything for political reasons. But I wonder if you see the correspondence between the crypto world, the blockchain possibilities of liberation that you just responded to, and your gender. Maybe this is a stupid question, in which case we can agree to cut it out.
No, because it's a question that I had to ask myself, because it's everyone's experience of everything is different. More than one person I have spoken to has shared the experience that I had of looking back on my entire life and going, what did this mean in light of the new knowledge that I have now? Once I realised that I was actually trans and not just a good ally. So in terms of making art about secrets that are not available to the owner, that's fairly obvious. I mean, by the time I was doing Certificate of Inauthenticity, the work was screaming at me. It was like, hey, you should really look at what you're doing and think about it. But the part of my brain that Section 28 installed and was committed to making sure I didn't realise I was trans was like, no, it's fine, ignore it. There's other explanations for these phenomena. That's fine. I can see very clearly, looking at it, how on an artistic level, the questions of encryption, of privacy, of identity, and of their ironization, because sort of the word I haven't mentioned yet is irony, and the work
I think that's come across in some of your jokes in the last hour.
It might have, yes, but sort of that assembly of ideological and practical materials. Sort of looking back on it, it's like, oh, yes, of course, yeah, oh no, and that desire to subtract a transcendent authority from social authenticity, which are, those are all terms I could happily discuss for at least another podcast, but take it that I mean these in a gentle and everyday way. The desire is no small part of the history of trans liberation. of which I am almost entirely a beneficiary rather than a producer. Removing the figure of the God surgeon, who is the person who gets to decide whether you physically transition or not, removing the psychiatrist who gets to say whether you are trans or not, removing the state's ability to say, no, actually, you can't change the name that we have for you on file because we are the final authority on identity rather than merely a bureaucracy that records reality. That sort of subtraction of trusted third parties is a large part of trans liberation. It's obviously easy to massively over-egg this and immediately go wrong if we try to push it in directions beyond something I'm saying off of the cuff on a podcast. But for me, because of my interests, the resonances were there. In terms of does this stuff still have liberatory resources to offer? Yes, it does. Sort of as far as I'm concerned, if someone is attending an anti-trans rally dressed in black and doing a Nazi salute, someone is at least deploying the aesthetics of fascism against being trans, and the genocidal, or if we are being polite, eliminationist laws that are being proposed in the States at the moment against trans people are, that's not social democracy, let's put it that way. Now, we can argue whether that is the primary objective of everyone involved with it, or whether it is simply a stalking horse for the abolition of labour protections and collective bargaining, or some other cause which increasing the state's power to dictate what is right and wrong for an individual opens up. But on the way there, it has the material effect of fucking up and killing trans people. So I can happily have an informed discussion about the vulgarities of dabbling in the term actually existing fascism this long after the Second World War, but it ain't just an aesthetic for some of the material struggles that trans people are currently involved with, certainly in the Anglosphere. But yes, so technology can, of course, assemble you a list of all the people you want to gather onto a train. It can also allow those people to communicate without you being able to find out what their plans are. And it can allow them to find each other and organize. And beyond cryptocurrency, although it is very useful for paying for healthcare that you are denied because of the trusted third party of the state saying,
Okay.
no,
I think we've rammed this point home now.
Yes.
So
the thing that I'm interested in is homebrew hormone creation, like creation from first principles. Yes.
yeah.
Sorry, I can ram home a different point, and I apologise for going off on one. I've had a very hard week on this front, so I apologise.
Well, I'm sorry. I don't wish to dwell on the private bit, and I also want to come across as more of a turf than I actually am, because that's not going to help our conversation.
Oh no, goodness, no.
I think we've done quite a lot here, because you've somehow, even in a disagreement, managed to somehow highlight the technological promises are both potent and flawed, and that actually we can drive up all the possible outcomes from any of this, that actually this technological and ideological conversation, because frankly, we have not really moved away from materialist Marxism all that much in most of what we've done here, but it can produce so many conflicting outcomes that I think I would like to encourage any of our academic listeners to go back to the period of the last 10 years and kind of revisit this pseudo-fascism of crypto spaces, because it actually has produced interesting and non-trivial results, some of which have been aesthetics, some of which have been called artworks, but a lot of which have had financial outcomes. Like, markets have crashed because of some of the things that you've been engaged with. So
I'll have to cash out my Bitcoin and start communicating with people cryptographically to flee the States.
well, at least half of that doesn't sound so terrible. Good luck, and thank you for the conversation, Rhea.
Thank you.
Proof of Work, Blockchain Provocations 2011 to 2021 by Rhea Myers is published by Urbanomic. I'm Pierre Delancey, and the editor is Marshall Poe. Thanks for listening. Join us next time.